Get ready for a ton of speculation in this week's Welcome to Mystara, as you've selected possible locations for Blackmoor, the fabled precursor empire that kicked off the Mystara setting literally with a bang. This has always been one of the biggest mysteries in Mystara. It was deliberately left vague and never defined, so the players could place it anywhere they wanted. Well, there's not many places you can put the ruins of the most technologically advanced society in D&D history, but we're going to try. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's find Blackmoor. A quick summary of Blackmoor for the new people, and I have videos covering all 4 of the modules if you want to go back and watch those, which I recommend you do. Thousands of years before the arrival of the Alphatians and the rise of Thyatis, Blackmoor dominated the planet. They were a breakaway province of a corrupt empire who made an alliance with a crashed spaceship and used their technology to become the most powerful and formidable nation the world has ever seen. Centuries later, however, something went horribly wrong, and Blackmoor blew itself off a map in the cataclysm known as the Great Rain of Fire. Most D&D settings have some sort of cataclysm attached to them that destroyed an ancient empire. Greyhawk had the Reign of Colorless Fire, Dragonlance had the Great Destruction, or just the Cataclysm. Eberron gave us the creation of the Mournland, Forgotten Realms had Karsus's Folly, the Spell Plague, the Dawn Cataclysm, the Killing Storms, the Plague of Fields, the Wailing Years, and my god, how is anybody in that setting still alive? Mystara is no exception. The main difference is Blackmoor is so much further back in the past compared to the other cataclysms. Blackmoor came to power about 4000 BC, then blew up in 3000 BC, meaning the destruction of Blackmoor is 4000 years in the past. The Great Rain of Fire was so powerful it shifted the axis of the planet. According to sources, the original North Pole was near Ethengar, so that should give you an idea of how much the planet shifted. It also does rule out several areas where you can place Blackmoor because of the impact of the initial explosion. The Hollow World box set creates a problem with the polar openings because of the rotation of the planet would have placed them somewhere near the equator, initially judging by Ethengar's distance from the polar regions now. But that's something for the cartographers to figure out. So we can rule out any area near the known world or anywhere else near along the same lines of longitude. Blackmoor was a temperate region, so they wouldn't be anywhere near the polar regions, of course. The Blackmoor artifacts that have been found can just be explained away by saying the Force threw them into the upper atmosphere or they were part of some distant outpost of Blackmoor. If you rotate the planet on the axis, you can throw a starship engine across the planet. Most notably, there's very few artifacts left from the Blackmoor Empire, and with one exception, they're huge building-sized artifacts. You don't find Blackmoor swords or Blackmoor shields. Everything was destroyed. Only the largest pieces have survived, indicating the destruction was complete. Now, staring at the map for hours of the entire Mystara world, there's 4 places I've found that I could place the ruins of Blackmoor, but you can pick any of them or just make it up where you want it. I did have some criteria for the placement. It had to be away from the same longitude as Ethengar, since that's the one geographic constant I have to work with. It had to be in a large enough landmass to fit something of its size, with one glaring exception. Lastly, it had to be an area that looked shaped by an explosion. You're not going to find the ruins of Blackmoor in an open field. 4,000 years is enough for the soil to return, but there's still going to be some sort of crater or some signs of an explosion of some sort. So grabbing every map I could find, the first option I've got is the most boring and the one exception to my rules, and that's Blackmoor is at the bottom of the ocean. It does make a lot of sense. An explosion that large could easily vaporize an entire continent. There's no ruins of Blackmoor. There's no Chernobyl-like empty ruins for the players to walk through. Everything was vaporized in the blast down to the bedrock that the seas have reclaimed. You can sail your ship right over Blackmoor and never know. It's a solid location, but it's also the most boring. The second location is on the continent of Davinia. There's a large portion of desert south of the jungle coast below the island of Belisara. Some people have put various desert races in the region, but it's large enough to put the Blackmoor ruins there. The desert would be the blasted wastelands of the once great empire, given a massive sense of scale to the size of the explosion. The desert is thousands of miles across its largest section. You could drive home the point by having the desert be mostly glass for much of its size, and the players are going to appreciate how bad the Great Rain of Fire is when they have to divert thousands of leagues out of the way because the only other way is across nothing but league after league of radioactive, crunchy glass. The third option places Blackmoor in the region labeled Old Thonia on the continent of Skothar. The Thonians were the empire that Blackmoor broke away from and eventually conquered themselves, and the name would suggest Blackmoor would be located in the far Arctic north. There are a few problems placing it this far north, mainly the polar opening. At the height of its power, Blackmoor had flying craft and was more science fiction than fantasy. A giant hole leading into the Hollow World would have been an emergency escape for the few members of Blackmoor, and the Hollow World would have been littered with Blackmoor refugees. This is more of a continuity problem than a geographic one, as I'm having to compensate for the massive gaping holes in the planet with a setting that made no mention of them because it was written years before the Hollow World was thought up. There's plenty of room in Scothar for Blackmoor, so the Thonia location does work. It would be partially submerged, so there's not a lot of room left in the area for the remains of a large empire. So you combine the ocean bottom theory with the blasted wasteland theory. This gives you the ability for the players to discover Blackmoor because of the usual constant night of much of the year there. Having the players notice the large green radioactive glow as they approach should make them reassess their current course. The fourth location that would be suitable is again in the southern continent of Devania, the massive range of mountains located west of Lower Erupt. This would be the opposite of the large crater idea. While there is a massive gaping hole, it's surrounded by mountains. The catch is they're not true mountains. Assume the explosion was created underground. The disaster could have thrown up massive amounts of rocks, only for it to come down in giant massive piles of broken stone. The mountains that surround the ruins are just rocks. They're not true mountains, but they're so large in scope they resemble mountains by anybody who gaze upon them. This would make getting to Blackmoor a nightmare because there's no passes or other areas you normally find in a mountain range because they aren't really mountains. If you wanted to create your version of the Voyage of the Princess arc, one of the high points of the campaign would be the discovery of Blackmoor. I don't think anything else could compare to the players finally pinning down the mythical land they knew so little about. Whether they can actually visit the ruins would be up to you. You'd think there would be a lethal amount of radiation still lingering in places, but then you could point out that the rock-born dwarves are immune to this very specific type of radiation, and that was something they were designed for. It's your campaign, so it's your Blackmoor after all, though. So that wraps up this week's Welcome to Mystara. It's both a blessing and a curse that so little of the setting is fully designed. For people who like to challenge in creating a world, there's a ton to fill in the blanks. If you like reading the setting for ideas or because it's well written, you have to deal with the continuity issues, though. Next week, again, will be determined by vote. But until next week, remember, nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.